Hello, everybody. It is very bright. It is very bright. I'm Ted Roduner. I'm with Microsoft for Startups, which is Microsoft's global startup enablement program. If you are a startup founder and you want to learn how we can help you get started with generative AI, please come talk to me and my colleagues at the Microsoft table out front. So with the shameless plug out of the way, let's get into our panel topic, which is approaching AI impact on multiple fronts, moving past the chatbot. So I think we all know that chatbots are sort of the face of generative AI, but there are certainly a myriad of other applications that people are pursuing. That's why we have our expert panelists here to essentially talk about how they are approaching creative ways to implement generative AI in their organizations. So with that, if I could have you guys introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your roles.
Today, everyone. Hi, everyone. This is Abhishek. Really excited to be here and be part of the conversation. A little bit about myself. Most of my work in the past has been spanning applied machine learning as well as distributed systems with special focus on recommendations and search systems. While doing so, I've been just lucky to be working with a lot of great organizations and doing it in different domains. Started with doing video recommendations at Amazon, then ads at Twitter and a startup, tweets, then now most recently Pinterest, recommending pins. My best guess as to why I'm relevant to this panel is both that while doing so, I've been able to use vector databases and embeddings as a key enabler in all of that, as well as have a lot of experience building vector stores themselves. We started building them first at Twitter 4 to 5 years back, also contributed to the base algorithm a lot. Yeah, super early. Vector stores were not cool back then, but now I think these are key to what we do at Pinterest, for example. So yeah, that's what we.
So yeah, my name is Samee. I'm a director of engineering at ChipperCash. It's a fintech focused on the African continent, helping move money for folks. So kind of very analogous to like Square Cash, but focused on the African continent. Before this role, I was at Google working a lot on ranking and retrieval problems, especially on search, especially on local and geo search ranking. So a lot of experience working on ranking and retrieval. So coming to Chipper, I think we had a lot of problems, especially on the fraud side, and also on things like abuse, like referral abuse. So we had to solve a lot of these problems. And coincidentally, right, like over the last few years, we've seen a lot of progress, especially not only in of course, we have vector DBs, we're here at Pinecone, so, but also in just like, deep neural nets, like generating very good embeddings, and a lot of these are now open source. So I think just using those two together, we've opened up quite a bit of opportunities, especially in a very fintech setting, and really excited to chat more and kind of showcase what we've been working on and hopefully start a dialogue here at this conference.
Awesome. So my name is Sarah. I lead NLP and generative AI at Robinhood. It's funny, I also started my career at Google working on local search and recommendations. So I guess that's a good incubator for the LLM space, who would have guessed. So at Robinhood, our mission is democratizing finance for all. And when we think about that, in the early days, that was bringing mobile and commission-free trading to our investors. And now we think about how we scale. And when we talk about democratizing finance and making the avenues that maybe high net worth people have always had available to them accessible to everyone, a lot of that comes with scalability that generative AI unlocks. And so Robinhood's really excited to take advantage of this technology and build really beautiful products and systems that benefit our users in a way that really contributes to our mission. And I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Let's get to the first question. So I think we're at this moment where organizations are embracing generative AI, but there's this question of what is the first application that you bring into an organization that's going to be successful and be embraced? So you're kind of the hero. It's going to unlock more generative AI projects. That's the question. Sarah, do you want to go first?
Yeah, we talk about this a lot at Robinhood and also, in events like this. I think when you think about generative AI applications, it's very easy. We talk about beyond chatbots. It's very easy to think about these Q&A applications and just shipping them directly to your customers. But in the broad scope of Gen AI applications, I'd encourage people to kind of think about two vectors, so to speak, of information. One is, what does it feel like when you fail? How big of a deal is it when you fail? Is it directly facing the user, or is it like a GitHub Copilot situation where if you fail, there's a moderator, someone alongside, and those failures don't have large business impact? And the second aspect is, how often do you fail, right? How reliable is your solution? And I think the real sweet spot for first applications are ones that don't fail often, and when they do, it doesn't have direct user-facing impact. And that is not always chatbots that talk directly to customers without much guardrailing or supervision, right? Even though that might be the most common use case that we see, there are a lot of things in the middle that are a lot more robust and can provide phenomenal business impact, and we can talk about that later. So I'd really encourage people to kind of think about that two-degree matrix a little bit.
Samee?
Yeah, I think what I would kind of take this conversation is essentially like, I think there's no like one size fits all kind of advice here, because everyone is, I'm sure there's people working e-commerce, fintech, right, like different use, because I think a lot of it is driven by what is the most important problem or the set of problems at your place, at your company, and applying like this kind of thinking to see what you can do. So for us, for instance, a big thing was fraud, right? From a perspective of having duplicate users. I think, I don't know if people know, but in the last few years, it's become extremely hard to do like device-based tracking. Apple, Google have made it very difficult for good reason, but also for these cases, it becomes very tough for us to catch fraudsters. So one of the things we used was kind of develop a facial embedding model. We used FaceNet, and then are we now just for the MVP, we didn't even think about fine-tuning it or anything. So we just kind of basically generated embeddings for facial features, stored them in Pinecone, and essentially had a one-to-many facial verification system available to us in a month, right? So it's like really looking at those important things, because I think a lot of the advice comes here is like, chatbots, but they can be cool, you could show them, and they have a very strong, I would say, primary effect, like in terms of getting people excited, but in terms of actually giving value in production, you'll quickly see it's a very, challenging thing, because if you make a chatbot, let's say for your company, I would say more than 50% of the problem is like getting people to use it, adopt it, right? A lot of people, I'm sure looking at maybe bots for finance, for operations, for other places in their company, but there's a big gap in getting them to also see how they can use those chatbots. It's a human problem to a large extent as well.
Yeah, I think I have two different takes on that. The first one being that to be able to really, close the gap between the value that you can provide to the users, first we have to start from really understanding what the technology really enables, what are its limits, where does it fail, and where does it really shine. Right? That has to be the first start, and events like these are like a great starter for that. And because it's not just LLMs or ChatGPT, there's a whole lot happening out there. Probably we'll get a chance to dive in there as well. Once you do that, the second most important thing really is to stay true to your users, the problems that you're solving for them, and stay true to the company's mission that you're, again, building towards. Once you do that, then a lot of possibilities emerge, right? And starting from just, as I totally agree with what Samee said here, just putting a chatbot out there is maybe 10% of the problem, especially now that we have a lot of the stack kind of abstracted out. You can just put things out there. You can have a Pinecone, you can have a ChatGPT, et cetera, et cetera. Once you start, even playing with that as engineers or the people who build it, you'll quickly realize it's failing good amount of times. So what looks great on a tweet is viral, is not meant for production, right?
In your experience, Abhishek, how long does it take to go from idea into production? What does that look like?
Yeah, I wish there was like one size fits all answer to this as well. It really, really depends what you're dealing with. First, like, let's start with the data. Do you really have the data? Like, to have something to go off of? Because that can be the long pole in those cases. Let's assume you have that and you have it in the right format and everything else. Then, do you have the right infrastructure to make use of all of this? Because, like, do you have your data lake set up? Like, can you really play with data with ease? Second, are you able to train? Do you have GPUs even? Right, which is not a for granted thing these days. From there on, like, there are other parts of the stack. Do you have retrieval stack? Do you have a Pinecone or any equivalence set up there? Right. Once you have all of that figured out, then let's just say for companies who have that, then I'll go back to my previous point, which is that the moment you start playing with it, there's lots and lots of things places where things just break, right? And so lots of time just goes in fine-tuning that, honing that, figuring out all the corner cases, because when you look at just aggregate metrics or one or two qualitative examples here and there, that's not the whole picture, right? So a lot of time just goes in there making sure that you're putting something out there that's not going to create headlines the next day.
Got it. Similar question to you, Samee. In your experience, what are some of the real world challenges you face going from pilot to production?
Yeah, I think, again, echoing a lot of what Abhishek said, is we don't understand, right, like at a fundamental level when starting on problems, right? Like, so I think we are very bad at estimating, we as in humans, the long tail, right, of projects. And I think especially if you're not done that, right? So I think very important to have robust, for instance, even, maybe you have your MVP out, but focusing a lot on having a good evaluation strategy, right? So that you can kind of keep a good grip on how things are going. And then also, for instance, if you're building a pipeline to, and all of these, if you're using a vector database, a big part of it is the indexing process, right? Where you create the embeddings, put it in Pinecone. But what if, if you're dealing with millions of data points, and then let's say tomorrow you found a bug in your, pipeline and you need to backfill it again, that's not going to be very, very trivial. So you need to make sure you also have your tooling, right, so that you can kind of move fast on things. And I think going to production, right, for me, it's a lot about a game of rhythm rather than anything about raw speed. So having a good rhythm, for instance, having a good feedback loop as you hit your milestones, and I think from there, things become very, very institutionalized of sorts within your company and your org, and then you have other people more willing to also jump in and help. So part of it is also just very cultural parts to it, not just a technical problem. And then especially advocacy within your own org, right? Like trying to show people how it works. Because at the end of the day, even if you're starting it out, the idea here is so strong, it will most likely, other people in the company would also want to do something similar, right? So, those are.
I like that rhythm over velocity. Sarah, anything to add?
I think I love the rhythm of velocity. I would encourage people to think about, if we imagine anyone here play with Legos as a kid or an adult, Legos are really, really great tools, but the real beauty comes in how you put them together, right? And I think today a lot of people take for granted that there's still value in being really good at knowing how to put Legos together. Anthropic, OpenAI, they've built very good, stable Legos. But how we put them together, there's a lot of creativity and development still that I think the new age ML engineer is figuring out. So for instance, what does the question look like that you pass into the vector database, right? Do you just take in the user question? Do you do a hypothetical document encoding, a hide embedding, where you rephrase it as an answer? There's this whole research space coming out And I think for teams that are building, reframing, and taking that opportunity to learn all those tools is what an ML engineer is doing today. And so part of that rhythm is not taking for granted, from first principles, everything that you're building, and is it optimized? Just because you have this really durable Lego, there's a lot to do with how you put it together to make a really durable structure. And we shouldn't take that for granted just because, this Lego's a new shiny shape, to abuse that analogy a little bit.
Great. Moving on to kind of like looking forward, I think as you just touched on, Sarah, like just the pace of all of this. But as you said, we're seeing all these new kind of combinations of models. Do you guys have any, I don't know, thoughts on how you're sort of synthesizing all this and how you're kind of thinking about your roadmaps going forward? Abhishek, do you want to start that one?
Yeah. So there are two things added. At a personal level, I think there are many layers to peel here. First for me is I always like to start from the basics, building blocks, trying to understand that, coming from a tech background. So I really like to delve into the technology, what is behind all of it, right? Where are its limitations, where will it break? Then from there, one level up, it's not just one technology. There's a ton going on here. There's an outsized focus maybe on LLMs or ChatGPT, but there's a lot going on out there. Just purely infra point of view, purely just deep learning even, there's just a lot, right? So you have to understand that. And then one level up, there is the whole application stack, which goes beyond advancements in one particular area. So I think what was kind of pictured in one of the slides earlier, how do you just hook all these things up and what starts to break there, right? I'd like to understand that. And then the one layer above that, really be able to have a sense of, if you're in your own organization trying to apply this within that, then where is the value that I can bring? Because there's no point in just replicating what might be cool. Some examples there are like Firefly from Adobe, really cool product, right? It's not ChatGPT, it's the more diffusion kind of flavor of it. Just yesterday, Shopify launched Sidekick, right? So it is a chatbot, but it's really true to what their customers would be delighted from, right? So being able to have a sense of at all three layers of what will drive value at the end of the day is essential.
Great. Related question for you, Samee. With all the advancements in the LLMs, is there anything that has you particularly stoked that you're really hopeful about?
I think it's probably this idea of the last couple of years, the developments in foundation models, but I am way more excited about kind of pairing up a foundational model, right? Like one of the LLMs that we, like OpenAI or Anthropic Claude, right? Like pairing that up with other kind of models, right? Like for instance, you could have a image segmentation, you had SAM come out by Facebook, that's open source. You have an image, you could segment it, get all the different items, embed them in some vector space. So then you suddenly have a lot more you can do with the image. And then you can kind of feed that back into your LLM and have it kind of go through all the different segmented images, right? So I think ultimately, again, what Sarah was actually saying, I think it's very important for all of us. There's a new space and things are very, right, like we're at that explosive pace going and everyone is very, very, building new things and things like LangChain, Llama Index, they're great. But I always tell people maybe try implementing what maybe, LangChain or Llama Index in their abstraction is doing yourself, and then you can reuse it. And I think that's very helpful. But I think there's that world of you have your abstraction everyone's building, but it's very early days. No one has it really solved. But we can kind of use inspiration from his previous, ML techniques, ranking retrieval. These are very cookie cutter, and then taking those abstractions and then seeing how you can kind of fit that in, rather than the other way of okay, let me just learn the verbiage and the jargon that comes with what people are building right now and learn that. So yeah, definitely more first principle. And I think the exciting thing is it's very unclear what how ML or AI would look like in 5 years. To me, that's exciting.
Yeah. Sarah, anything to add?
Yeah, going back to like what the future, what technology is excited, like I think multimodal understanding is something that we haven't fully grasped our minds around when we think about the power of enterprise applications to come. So if you think about a graph, for instance, right, like when you look at a graph, it's easier for your mind to understand than looking at a ton of tabular data. The reason for that is that images have the capability to compress a lot of information in a small amount of space or bytes, whatever they might be, for us to understand. And when we look at some of the advancements coming out of research areas, and we see these like language models or have the ability to interpret those images and understand, all of a sudden everything becomes unlocked for a much more efficient, capable system. And I think that type of multimodal understanding is very new. It's not even available for many of these APIs, but we see it coming out of research. And I'm just putting on my seatbelt because we're still just working on the chat completion API with free text. And there's so much coming, which is why when it comes to planning, that type of agile development and getting leadership for those of you who are in more enterprise spaces, really tuned in and understanding and being a good translator for them is really important, because it's not necessarily true that a one-year roadmap is the best idea in a space like this. Obviously, from a product visioning perspective, yes. From a technology perspective, I would not recommend.
Great. This is maybe a bit of a loaded question, but what impact do purpose-built vector databases make for the teams building AI applications? Free for all.
I can start, yeah. So at the core of it, what vector databases are enabling is they enable you to ask all sorts of questions to the semantic knowledge that you have extracted out of your data sets in form of embeddings, right? And they enable you to do that at scale. When I say scale, we run vector DB clusters on the order of 5 billion items in it, and we are hitting it with on the order of hundreds of thousands of QPS on a daily basis. And so what that really means is they're enabling across your application stack just different kind of capabilities. So in the case of recommendation systems, what that specifically means is in the first stage of recommendation systems, you are going from billions of items to few thousands. And that's called like candidate generation. And they are key to that. You cannot run today if you are on a modern recommendation system stack, you cannot run without them. The reason being, you represent whatever your items or users are, let's say a tweet or a pin or a video, whatever. You store it into your vector database. You ask the questions of, okay, given a user, tell me the nearest similar users, or given a user, tell me the nearest pins that they like to engage with. And you're getting that answer in milliseconds on a billion scale corpus 10,000 times every second, right? So that's what we are talking, that's what vector stores are enabling. And if I were to talk about Pinterest, we wouldn't be having the sort of engagement we have driven on the platform over the years without that.
Extremely powerful. Anything to add from you guys?
I can add a few. I think, the point of having, a purpose-built, something that, I think maybe even, some people might be thinking, like, do I even need vector DBs to solve my problem? Maybe I can just put everything in my prompt. But I think as Abhishek, it's like a question of scale, right? Like, yes, you can do these things, but I think what purpose-built vector DBs enable are like a removal of headache around maintenance, and B, like, it allows you to kind of work with the technology in a more holistic way. For instance, you're building a certain product feature, right? You don't want to be bogged down trying to tune your Postgres if you're using like PG Vector or something, right? Like if you're scaling. But I think, for us as well, when we started off, we used, Postgres to kind of do the proof of concept. But I think we quickly saw there's going to be overhead, especially, if you don't, for instance, Pinecone, one of the things it gives us is metadata filtering for free. And that's not something that we have to build, right? Like we already get it. So I think, and especially going forward, we're going to see, there's other vector DBs, and I think the space has just started, and I think there's going to be way more use cases that kind of be enabled. Like for us as well, right? Like we do, if you're like searching like million faces, I want to see who's the closest. We get that answer in 200 milliseconds, right? Like that is insane for me. Like that's not something a small lean team like us could have probably built or done like even a few years back. So yeah.
I would also, more from the application space, the ability to use few-shot learning with an LLM is something that kind of gets overlooked when we think about generative applications and unique output for every unique input. But when you structure, particularly with GPT-4, which has very good abilities for structured output, the ability to basically fine-tune or hand-select your training data via prompting and using a vector database, get the right information, the closest 5 or 6 examples, and kind of almost mimic KNN in a sense. Cosine similarity is not a new concept, right? Dot products have existed for a really long time. What's interesting is when we use the scalability of a vector database to reframe problems that we've struggled with for so long, like how to get a great amount of training data available, right? Now, it's really, even we've seen it outperform Roberta models, right? Where you have the ability to just create classification problems in a generative AI space utilizing vector DBs. So for those of you who have kind of your old school NLP solutions, like also don't forget those and think about how they catch up in this new generative AI space, even if it's a supervised learning problem using vector DBs and output prompting for structure is, I think, really powerful.
I want to maybe zoom in a little bit. I think we've been talking about vector DBs as a scale enabler, but what it sometimes can be misconstrued as, there's some just pure hardware or computer science magic happening, just enabling it at scale on billion item scale. Really, the class of algorithms that are enabling vector DBs, they are called approximate nearest neighbor algorithms. They are actually trading off, for the technical audience here, they are actually trading off accuracy. So you're not getting 100% the right answer, but because of the end-to-end stack, you can live with the 95 or 99% right answer. But what these algorithms really enable is that by trading off that accuracy, they're enabling scale. Because in an alternate world, you would want to take dot products of billions of vectors, sort them all, which is just not feasible, right? So you are trading off accuracy, but that's all well and good given the end-to-end application stack, the way it has evolved.
Got it. All right, this is sort of a lessons learned question. If you had to go back and you had a do-over for your first Gen I application, what advice would you give yourself?
So anyone who's ever tinkered probably has had the experience where they tried something for 30 minutes and you're like, ship it. It's amazing. This looks great. Let's do it. I think a little bit of time in this space shows you that the prototype to production path with Gen AI is very different. Evals are very difficult and different and should not be overlooked. And I wish that maybe we understood with our enthusiasm on efficacy in prototyping, we had the experience and knowledge to know everything else that needs to get built out to make it a robust enterprise application. Because I think a lot of YouTube videos and tweets and demos get you super excited that you can do this really quickly. But part of the noise of generative AI is it's actually really hard to be sure that it works all the time, right? And so making it robust in that production environment is a lot of work that I think the whole industry is still figuring out.
Samee?
Yeah, I think I'll echo, some of what Sarah said, and also something I brought up earlier is evaluation, right? So I think let's look at the stack. You have essentially two parts if you're building like a RAG or retrieval augmented generation, right? Like, so you have your embeddings, you have the retrieval component, and let's say if you're operating over text, the the way you develop your chunks and snippets that go in, right? Like the length of it, and we've, if you, the main kind of I'd say expertise on this side has been developed very recently around like, okay, maybe you can just have a sliding window and chunk your document in 4 parts. Okay, that's good enough. But perhaps for your data, that's not good, right? So I think being very cautious, and those are the things that you don't want to solve as you're building, but like more like on an evaluation, like seeing what cases don't work and then optimizing for them. And then the second part is around, of course, the LLMs as well, where like sometimes, for instance, you're maybe using GPT 3.5, right? Like they've done variations of, their launches in the last few months. Maybe what's working today doesn't work on the next release, right? So making sure you can catch drift not at the API level as well. And then at the retrieval stage, right? Like make sure you're evaluating, the quality of the results you are putting back into your prompt. So I would say my learning, like, when we shipped it and all, we kind of did the evaluation piece after and tried, but I think would have been better if you just put in some extra time before, develop that, and then kind of keep the ball rolling. Because once you have a system launched and then it's already live, you have that data, and then you have to worry about building your evaluation. It can become very, very tricky very quickly.
Abhishek?
Yeah. I have 2 takes on this. So the first time I engaged with vector DBs and embeddings was about 5 years back at Twitter. And at that time, it was a team of 5 or 6 really rockstars engineers, not including myself. It took us on the order of 18 months or more to build ourselves a vector database from scratch, to build ourselves all the embedding models from scratch. And it was about 18 months later that we could, just start doing something or testing out and start to think about the application level and all the risks that come with that. So we are not in that world anymore. So of course, I would probably just hook up all the goodies that are available already. But there's a flip side to that almost immediately, which is that just the other day, I was trying to play with the LangChain APIs in a hack week that we had to try and build a bot for, serving our internal customers. Now, we could do that in a team of 2 in a couple of days, all well and good. But when you look under the hood, there are about, 10 to 20 different knobs that are all abstracted out by LangChain. And you just don't know what you're getting at the end of the day, because if you don't understand all those pieces, you don't know what you're in, where it will break, when it will break. So going back to what Samee said, have your evaluation pipeline set up from day 0. Make the effort to understand every nook and corner of what you're getting into. And only then you'll have somewhat reasonable out of the door.
That's a great note to, I think, end on. Can I get a round of applause for our expert panelists? Thank you.
We were going to do
a Q&A.
You guys are open to a few questions for Q&A, and then we're going to take a 15-minute break for coffee after we do this Q&A for about 10 minutes. So the first one is, there were a lot of questions in the last 2 presentations about the strategy on chunking your data. And a lot of them are curious if there's any more data-aware or enlightened approaches to improving your results and being more creative in how you're chunking this data when you're putting it into the LLM.
I can take a stab. So if you think of the whole, generative AI application stack, there are 3 things going on there. What you input into the ChatGPT, you have your prompt, you have your context, and then you have the model itself. You can play along all 3 dimensions. And even at the end of it, when you get the answers, you can actually work with that as well. So when it comes to these 3, prompting, you'll have to really stick with it. It's more of an art than a science at this point. It is bound to evolve. Then context size, context windows, and context. Yeah, we had Claude, yes, the day before had 200,000 context size, come out with that. But when you're talking about billion scale, 200,000 tokens is still nothing. So you can play a lot with the right context, and that's where vector DBs come into play. That's where you can go to your purpose-built data sets, make sure that the model that you're sending, asking questions to, has the right input to work with. Then the last piece is the model itself. you can fine-tune, you can build your own, and there's a whole lot of things you can do there. But just fine-tuning will go a long way. Doing all this, you have to take care of costs and latencies and whatnot as well.
Another question they had is that what are some of the most creative and non-traditional uses that you've seen for AI in the past 6 months?
Sorry, what are the most creative?
Yeah, what are some of the most creative and non-traditional uses of AI that you've seen?
I'll give a controversial answer. I think that the unsexy world of operational efficiency is really interesting. And I think for every new application that we see that's customer facing, I think most companies have 15 to 20 that can really change the way that their workflows happen internally. And I think what will really set companies apart are the companies that see that they can increase their operational efficiencies by 20% and then start doing 20% more. So things like SQL understanding, are there ways that product managers can use free text and explore their databases to make decisions quicker? Are there ways that we can summarize research reports and user research, right, to make it so that our UXRs can extract things faster? None of these things will necessarily be the most exciting tweet or Hacker News article that you read, but I think that they will be groundbreaking for how engineering organizations structure themselves and account for operational losses. And I think they're super exciting. So if that excites you, come find me after.
Yeah, this is very intriguing to me. I've been trying to keep a close watch. There's so much going on in this, like just the amount of creativity that is coming through this. One of my favorite categories is just, productivity of knowledge workers in a way. If you have developers in your company, there's so much happening just in that realm. The co-pilots and whatnot, there's a lot more will happen. Then imagine hiring data scientists today, but probably in the next couple of years, every person will have their personal data scientist to ask questions of from the get-go. And so what that means for productivity of organizations is just mind-blowing to me. There's the third one within the same category, which is being able to ask questions which are constrained within that organization. Ask yourself how much time, if you are in a medium to big organization, how much time each person spends trying to answer the most trivial questions. Oh, who's the person who works on that? Or where can I find some documentation on that? And if that is gone from like 2 hours to 10 minutes, that's already a big productivity booster.
Yeah, I think these are all, right, like, it's a very burgeoning space, and the way I see it is like, even for us, right, like we've been experimenting where, adding to this is like on agents, right? So basically you have chatbots, which are very passive, they give you data, but agents which can actually take action, right? So we have agents where, looking at like an onboarding agent, for instance, in Africa, a lot of folks, downloading even our app, which we've done very well to kind of reduce its size, but at certain MB, it can be prohibitive. So what if we develop an onboarding agent that talks to their WhatsApp API, right? And can onboard the users, who can attach images and all, and it knows functions it can call like on endpoints, right? So help onboard the user. So I think that to me is probably going to be the next wave. And you already see with OpenAI releasing, right, like functions, and LangChain has in the last few months also added support for this. So I think for me, the agents are going to be very interesting. And then on top of that, right, like more chaining different models. Like what if you chain, I think there's someone who had chained essentially a stable diffusion, right, like a diffusion model to an LLM to essentially, guided image in painting or guided image creation, right? Like, because sometimes if you look at even this world of diffusion models, you have folks first go to ChatGPT or something for it to create your prompt that you can feed into stable. So people, like, I feel like that's where it can be very powerful, right? And kind of combining different models. And there are demos where people have done it, but of course it's a different world to kind of productionize it. Right now, the costs are very prohibitive, right? To chain different models and do all of this, but it will come down.
Great. We have time for one more question. So the last one that we're going to ask today is for this panel is, what response evaluation metrics can be used in order to evaluate the correctness of the response before returning it to the user?
So I think using LLMs to evaluate LLMs is a fascinating concept. It's kind of like using a calculator to evaluate if the same calculator worked. But at the same time, when you think about evaluating generative content, human raters provide moment-in-time evaluations, right? They are great for gating deploys, for understanding the status of where you are today. But at the same time, if any change in your prompt happens and any change in your output happens, those ratings from those raters become stale. They are not evergreen. And there's a lot of technology out there. Gantry, I know, is a startup that's done a lot in this space. I know LangChain also has support for this, where you use the LLM to evaluate how similar your response is to a golden response. I think that is makes a lot of sense for iterative development, and I encourage people to do that for iterative development. At the same time, there's a lot of academic research out there that shows that it is not random where these LLMs mess up, right? So an LLM that fundamentally doesn't understand grammar, when it's generating content, will also be as grammatically incorrect there as when you ask it, is this output grammatically correct? Right? So I encourage people to not sleep on the fact that human evaluation is still a valuable mechanism that we need. And I don't think that's going anywhere. I just think it becomes moment in time eval rather than your traditional supervised learning setup where you have validation and test data that you can reuse as you iterate.
All right, can we get another round of applause for our panel?